per fer un repàs davant dels reptes que ens trobem amb tota la qüestió de l'energia, no només l'emmagatzematge i el transport, sinó a l'hora de regular-la i d'establir polítiques per accelerar aquest canvi. Ara passarem a la doctora Luisa Lima. Ella és professora de Psicologia Social i cocoordinadora del Social Digital Lab for Public Policy a ISCTE, un institut de la Universitat de Lisboa. La seva recerca es focalitza en l'aplicació de la psicologia social a la salut i a les qüestions del medi ambient. Ella és membre de la Scientific Advisory Board of the European Social Survey i és professora honorària a la University of Bath, com també membre al Lisbon Academy of Sciences i ha rebut un premi de la Portuguese Psychological Association del 2025.
So thank you very much for the invitation. It is a huge honor to be here. I'm clearly out of my comfort zone because everything before was from the hard sciences. I'm a social scientist. I am a social and environmental psychologist. Yeah. And I am a huge believer in interdisciplinarity. I coordinate now this Socio-Digital Lab for Public Policy, which brings together all the research units in my university. And so the point is to produce interdisciplinary research, bridges between disciplines to solve problems. And that makes sense in the face to the situation that we have now. Big problems cannot be solved by one discipline, and we miss the forest when we only look at the trees. So interdisciplinarity has to do with this, knowing one discipline and knowing how to bridge it to another one without losing our foot. So it is difficult, and that's what I will try to do here, coming from another science, looking at big problems such as climate change and sustainability, but also other problems that I would put on the table that has to be not with the planet changing, but also with human being is being changing also in these last years. And the problems of loneliness and social cohesion have an impact, and I will try to show the link of that with sustainability. Future scenarios that we are talking here are, for me, it's an incredible interdisciplinary exercise, because if you want to plan for the future, you have to look at the other disciplines and how they see that, because the future is complex, and these future scenarios are a very good exercise to interdisciplinary topics. I will approach this with two case studies in projects where I participated, where we created future scenarios. One has to do with public spaces and social connection, and the other with climate change and sustainable lives. And then I will go to step back and to think a little about the challenges that thinking about the future has, from my point of view. And then I will end up with some questions that I have about these possibilities that we have to think about the future. So I will state the problems of loneliness because I think it's something that is changing as to us as humans. We know that 20% of the population feels lonely most of the time in Europe, and young people especially have higher levels of loneliness. And this is a problem, a huge problem, because this is a new way of being in the world. And it cannot be approached only from one discipline. The World Health Organization has stressed the importance of looking at it from different perspectives. And the first perspective that has always been studied on loneliness, it was only psychology. But we cannot put 1/5 of the population into therapy. This is not how it works. And we have known that loneliness has important consequences for health. People die earlier when they feel lonely. But it has also associated with social inequalities and the social structure in society. People that are poor feel more lonely than people who are rich. So this is not only a question of the way people think or their problems, their mental problems. And we have also recognized that public spaces have a lot to do with the way people feel connected with others. And so loneliness is one case in where it was started to be disciplinary, and in the last 10 or 15 years has been approached from a lot of other disciplines, so we know a lot better how to intervene on it, not apart from the psychological treatment, okay? So we know that it is not an individual problem, it's a health problem, it is a social justice problem, it's an environmental problem also. So, and if we do that, we can try to intervene on this, as we have done with climate change for a long time. I'll go there after this. But have we done that, we can intervene in this area. So, for instance, the research by Sergei has shown for a long time that public spaces are social spaces, and if we take care of public spaces, we can rebring people together. That's what they have done in schoolyards in Barcelona, changing the environment to change social relations. And this is a projection of what would be gained in terms of economic gains and public health gains if they implemented the Eixos Verdes in Barcelona plan. They put more green spaces and the consequences they would have on that. So this is my point has to do with this interdisciplinary research. And if we take care of the spaces, we have consequences on people also. I've been involved in this Blue Health project. It is an European project where we took, it was coordinated by Matthew White, and I took part of the surveys we did in 18 different countries. Portugal was one of them. And we put this point of the impact of connection with nature, especially blue nature, water, and the impact that it had on well-being. And it had, living close to blue and green spaces, is you feel better, but you feel especially better. Your psychological well-being significantly increases if you visit places with nature, blue or green. And in this project, we also did, and I took it here because one of the case studies was in Barcelona. It was a future scenario for Barcelona and the connection with the natural spaces, especially the blue ones. Well, there were 5 cities and one of them is Barcelona, so we first looked at the big trends, the ones that apply to the city, the values that apply to the city, and that they put people together trying to imagine scenarios for Barcelona. And the scenario for Barcelona, there was someone there who did a graphic picture of the discussion of the things. And it had a lot to do with tourism, houses, didn't look very much like future because it also looked like present, right? It looked it didn't look like much more social than so. I'll come to this again, the difficulties of looking at scenarios for the future. And I hope that these scenarios that have to do with these kind of things are not yet very developed because interdisciplinary research in this area is not steady as it is in other areas. And I have this big hope that we can look at social connection and loneliness in the future, with future scenarios when interdisciplinary research is more developed. But looking at sustainability, we also recognize that we cannot look at the challenges of climate change without looking at from an interdisciplinary point of view and ignoring people and their social norms and their cultural values and so on. But when we see the disciplinary projections, as we have seen, there is a kind of missing persons. For instance, in that slide that you showed, there was cars, there were houses. Probably people were inside the cars, inside the houses, inside the factories. But many of the things are dependent on decisions of humans being as policymakers or citizens. And we know that this interplay between human behavior and climate change for a long time on both ways, the impact of human behavior on climate change, but also the impact of climate change on human well-being, namely climate anxiety, for instance, is one of the topics. But in this case, we have lots of, or some very well thought scenarios for the future. This is one from the European Environment Agency that looking at the trends in the food system, mobility system, built environment system and energy system, thought of 4 future scenarios for Europe in 2050, I think. And they had to do with the kind of public policy that would be implemented in the next years. Things that had to be with a more public view of the economy, or more a private view of the economy as main drivers of the economy, or look like more trusting on technology to solve the problems, or trusting on social norms. And this would picture different social scenarios for our evolution for a sustainable world. In this last, where there are the European flags, it is an idea that the European Union will produce regulation and will control regulating the system. In the opposed field, something like companies, the market, can solve developing technologies that will control what's going on. And there are other scenarios, one more focus on national norms or on community and changing the way people live for a more ecological perspective and local focusing and diminishing consumption and all that. But all this has to do with the way the decisions will be made and the kinds of societies in which we want to live. This is, in a way, very difficult and these are examples, more concrete examples that what can be future scenarios. But normal people like us, when we are not speaking about our own scientific area, look at those projections as very complex and very abstract, and usually societies are a bit like the outputs of all these scenarios that are done. We expect people to adapt to whatever the future will be, and that we will survive. We have a kind of uncertainty about what will happen to the human resources, to the earth, to the earth temperature, but we believe that somehow we'll manage to adapt as human beings. And looking at the levels of loneliness, I think that we are not the same as we were some time ago, and it's also a bit frightening. So, when we look at future scenarios, and it's the topic of this thing here, I have two big issues with that. The first one is interdisciplinarity, because of course it's very necessary, but it's complicated. It's complicated because we have communication barriers, because doing multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary research needs much more time, which means much more resources in research time. And you need to integrate these very diverse perspectives, and takes time. Probably for your career it's not so good to do interdisciplinary research than to do research that your colleagues perceive as valuable from their own point of view and the point of view of their discipline, because it's more interesting in terms of theoretical development. And it's always, if you don't have enough time and enough money to do proper interdisciplinary work, you have the risk of superficiality and you saying the same thing that everyone does. So in this structure that I coordinate, we do small steps towards interdisciplinarity, that some things work and some things don't work, but some things work. And the things that work are, for instance, seed money, giving small funding for projects that they have to have 2 PIs from 2 interdisciplinary research, from 2 disciplines. I'm not speaking about ERCs, I'm speaking about 20,000 euros project, but it's a beginning so that they can start to collaborate, because everything has to do with patients and building trust, because we are human beings, and doing interdisciplinary research is a challenge for us as persons. The other thing is to fund jointly supervised PhDs. One PhD that has 2 supervisors, two supervisors from different research fields. So these are examples of how we construct this trust that is necessary. If not, we just put the same thing that we have already done, and we don't really have the time to listen to other people. The second problem has to do with future thinking. We are not very good at thinking about the future. We have certain biases thinking about the future. For instance, we think that, okay, it will be worse, but, well, close to us, it is not so bad as it will be in other countries. Maybe China can be a counterintuitive example, but this is an important bias, as we tend to be pessimistic in a way, but spatially optimistic. Around us, it's not so bad, because there's lots of reasons why we can speak about it if we want. But second thing is that if we increase the threat, if we increase the feeling of that we are threatened, that our society is in danger, we tend to protect our own people and being less willing to collaborate with others. And that is also a big problem for future thinking, because we tend to not want to collaborate with others. It's not very good. Another thing that we know is the more abstract the scenarios that we are put to speak about are, the less we think they are likely. So the less probability we think that they are to occur. So in order to believe in certain views of the future, we have to make them concrete. so that people engage with it. And another very important bias is the confirmation bias. We tend to agree with things we already believe. So we tend to maintain our beliefs, and if we are a disbeliever in climate change, for instance, it is difficult to even see the evidence of the other way around. And Angela told that very well with people from right-wing, men from right-wing. So putting it together to think about future thinking, it is important to look at the storytelling that we take about the future. It's not only put numbers there, it is also telling a story about how life will be, to have a narrative, to have visualization of how it will be, and to co-create it with the persons, with their own language, so that these scenarios can be useful for people. And policymakers are people. And so I will show you an example of scenarios that we constructed more or less like that. We created in this project, it's called Inherit. The project aim was to create what we call the triple win, to reduce the environmental impacts, to improve health, and to increase equity. So health, environment, and equity. It's a sustainable future, and try to see measures that would be at the same time good for the three types of these three dimensions. And, well, we did this. For instance, green areas in urban areas are a triple win because they are good for your health, they are good for the environment, and they promote social cohesion. But we try to create scenarios of this, how we could reach this in different ways, in positive ways, but in different ways. So we tried to figure out how, in the future, we could have a sustainable future in terms of living, green spaces, energy efficient housing, or moving, the way we travel, and consuming. So concrete types of examples for the lives of people. To do this, we asked for researchers to give us the main trends for the future, what was known in different disciplines to be a predictable future. And then we asked experts, either from academia, from the civil society, from policymakers, from people from business, so on, to think if these trends had high impact or low impact and the level of certainty they were on these things. So, for instance, things like aging population was something that everyone was known that it would be a big impact for the future, but also it was certain that those things would be on every scenario. Okay, and then we created scenarios that dealt with the things that were high impact, but also high uncertain. So it's also something that it is easier for us to work in 2 dimensions. 3, it's so difficult, so I think most of the scenarios have 2 dimensions. And it was also one of the axes had to do with would be the driving sector, the public or the private, and then the social dynamics would be more individualistic or more collectivistic. And we created these 4 scenarios crossing this that, well, as for instance, in this corner, it is one for all for one. It's a more community type of future, by the state having a lot of impact on that. And on the other side, very much on the digital, personalized type of economy and living. And we did more than that. We created personas. It was Adam over there, and it is, Margaret, and did some videos so that it would be a narrative. It had to be their lives. People would think about this. And then we put these different scenarios in 15 focus group in 5 countries to know what people would think about these scenarios. So it was a lot of effort. People were very, this was the most controversial, the one that has to be with lots of personalized and augmented reality and virtual reality scenarios. It was the one that was most controversial because people were most afraid of their privacy, autonomy would be challenged. And they liked most this one that had to do with more mutual support, communality, green spaces, and so. But, and after that we did lots of tools to policymakers and to communities to help them. And so we did it, we checked many of the boxes. We did a narrative, we did it interdisciplinarily, we co-created, and so. Of course, we also created positive scenarios. It was one of the assumptions to create positive views from this thing. We tested it. And now I have to finalize, I have some difficult questions for me, and I hope that it can make you think. So it took a lot of energy to create those scenarios. It was a huge effort. And it was, we tried to do it properly. And I have the videos, they are in the internet. So my question is, after these years, the project finished, we had the paper as well, okay? So, but what was it useful for? Who uses it? And preparing for this conference, I sent an email to Caroline so that she could tell me, well, it had a huge impact, lots of communities used it. Well, she didn't answer me, so I cannot give you this. But I looked in the internet and I really could understand that. So this is my first question. The second question is that even in that project, when we put future scenarios, we expect people to adapt. And when we think about people, we think about people that are middle-class persons like us, okay? So they are usually white. In that project, we had the things on older people because it was one of the things that the population would age. So we had intergenerational issues in the scenarios, but not really gender or social class or migrants or whatever. So we put the future scenarios for a kind of ideal middle-class type of persons. But our society is so diverse, the impacts are not equal for everyone, are they? So, and the third thing is that the social variables are always the output in these scenarios. We put the energy, the temperature, and then we think, when we think, what consequences it will have to do with the lives of people. But wouldn't it make sense to put somehow the other way around? Like, if we had societies that are less empathic, less cooperative, people that don't connect to each other, what would be the consequences for the earth. Does that make sense? Thank you very much.